But when he gets into his argument, he gets into it incorrectly, and I'll point that out to you again. How many of you go to the 4-year school? And then maybe graduate school. So diagnosing what these people say is really important. You don't get caught in a trap that they're not necessarily setting intentionally, but it's said anyway. The second one we'll discuss is a man named James Rachels. Today, this man leads the charge for voluntary active euthanasia. He has interesting arguments again. He has upsides and downsides. One is the utilitarian argument, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, doing what's in everybody's best interest. And we'll go through the lecture and you'll see his notes. The consequentialist argument is probably his strongest argument. But what none of these people use is the argument from autonomy, and I will explain this. Some of you, I don't know who it is in the different classes because I read them all together, so I have 242. Some people have said the argument from autonomy is probably the most important argument. Does anybody remember when we were talking about Epicurus, I just forgot her name, Epicurus, Miss Thompson, and she presented 5 things she thought were important. It would make life a good life, but there was no way to pick the same ones for everybody. But the last one she picked was autonomy, the right to decide what we think is in our best self-interest. We have self-ownership, we have self-interest, and hopefully that produces the good life or the life of happiness. Say that louder for me. One more time.
James Rachel, is he against or for euthanasia?
I'm sorry, he is for euthanasia, and he's the most current and probably the strongest proponent of it right now. Not that his arguments are flawless. His best part argument, when we get to it, is going to be called the consequentialist argument. And this is probably, I didn't want to lift that up. This does not really belong here. This is probably the strongest argument, aside from people who were for or against it, for allowing active euthanasia, voluntary active euthanasia to occur. And it's called the argument from autonomy. The right to make personal decisions is at the heart of libertarian political philosophy. So let's start with Gay Williams. And his argument is called the wrongfulness of euthanasia. Now, what's important about this is over here. But I want you to understand, when you read these people, it's really important to understand how they make their argument before you get to their argument. Because a lot of times we get swayed. Someone makes an argument, goes, well, yeah, that sounds interesting. And then, of course, their points seem valid. How he gets into it is really faulty. He defines euthanasia as involves taking a human life, one's own or that of another. Pause.
That's murder.
Say what?
Would that be the definition of murder? Oh, involves taking. Okay.
It could also be considered self-defense.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the situation. The situation is going to dictate what it is.
Okay, those are valid points. No one's ever brought that up, but let's move back to euthanasia. He's talking about euthanasia, and he's saying the definition of euthanasia involves taking a human life, one's own, or that of another. From the definition of euthanasia, is there anything wrong with this? What is that called?
Suicide.
Suicide has got nothing to do with euthanasia. So you scratch your head and you think, okay, he's going to tell us what's wrong with it. And he starts off by including suicide. Well, you can say suicide's wrong. There's a moral argument to be made for that. It's called sanctity of life argument. But that's not euthanasia. That's why we call it suicide. Everybody with me on that? Okay, so it's kind of a strange way to let him get into it. Now, he does define it right. The person whose life is being taken must be someone who's believed to be suffering. We talk about that, painlessly putting to death someone suffering from either an incurable disease or terminal condition. From suffering from some disease or injury from which recovery cannot be reasonably expected, and the action must be deliberate and intentional. That's what voluntary active euthanasia is. Then he qualifies, the killing cannot be the result of an accident. The wrong drug used with no intent to kill the patient. Premeditated murder has to have intent. Nevertheless, death ensues. So I bet this is 20 years ago. I'm watching one of these TV shows about a hospital staff, and the lady in charge of the ER, she has a cane, she's got a little bit of a limp, and she's not in the ER when this happens. She's across the road with they call CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of the hospital, and talking about finances. And what happens is there's a crisis in the emergency room. A young boy brings in another boy and says he's going through heart failure. He's going through, and the medical people say, what's wrong with him? They say, well, he was at a cocaine party. He's having a cocaine overdose. Evidently, we have a drug when you administer it to someone who's close to heart failure as a result of a cocaine overdose. It neutralizes the overdose.
Narcan.
Eh?
Narcan.
And the kid goes into heart failure. Anyway, and about that time, the lady in charge of the ward comes back and says, what's going on? They said, the kid's got a cocaine overdose. She says, how do you know? Well, we send a tox down to the toxicity people, and she says, did it come back? And he said, not yet, but the kid went right into heart failure. Cocaine overdose. She says, how do you know it was a cocaine overdose? He says, his brother brought him in and said they were all at a cocaine party. And the kid dies. And the tox report comes back, and it turns out it wasn't cocaine, it was crystal methadone. And the drug to stop a cocaine overdose is contraindicated. It will make you die. The wrong drug used, but no intent to kill the patient. This is an accidental homicide. It's not euthanasia. He's right. Neither can it be the result of the right drug meant for treatment, which inadvertently kills the patient. So when I'm going through cancer treatment, they have to knock me out 5 times, and they run a tube down my throat to see what's going on down here. It's called a direct laryngoscopy, or they call it DLs. And to do it, they have to have a CAT scan, and they want it with contrast. Contrast means that the picture is very amplified. You can see a lot of things in it. So they give you a drug, and the first 4 cruise right through it. The 5th one they give me, and the technician's having a problem getting the machine ready, and I'm laying in this little tube, and after about 10 minutes he pulls me out. He goes, how you doing? I said, it's getting kind of warm in here. Well, you're in a little tube, so okay. And he leaves me out to cool me down, and he's still working on the machine, and suddenly I'm feeling my body do this, and I'm not doing it. It's just going out of control. And I said, hey, what happens if I'm having a bad reaction? And he looks at me, and next thing I know, there's a male nurse and 2 doctors in there. And they must have given me an injection or something. I remember nothing. I didn't go out, but I don't remember anything. And when I finally came to, I was back to normal, but I had a splitting headache. The doctors had left, and I said to this nurse, I said, what the heck just happened to me? He says, oh, your blood pressure went down to 60/30. I said, was that bad? He says, yeah, you were right at the edge. And I said, the edge of what? And he says, well, we lose people. I almost flatlined. My blood pressure just almost bottomed out to 0. And I thought, great, I came in for a CAT scan, and you didn't intend to, but you almost killed me. The right drug meant for treatment, but inadvertently kills the patient. That would have been an accidental homicide as well. So he's right up to here, but his initial premise is wrong. Why would he do that? You have to think those things through, people. We're talking about philosophy here. So then he draws conclusion. Finally, failure to implement the treatment because there's no reasonable recovery is not killing. The disease causes the death. This is not passive euthanasia. Didn't we define this on Monday? When the patient has the right through Curzan to stop, never start, or start and stop, the patient has rights, treatment's withdrawn, nature's the bad person, and death ensues. And we know that death ensues. So he does 2 things wrong with his argument to get us into it. One is he includes suicide, which is bizarre. And number 2, he just ignores the legal definition of passive euthanasia that grows out of Curzan versus Missouri Health Services, 1990. The patient has rights to dictate their treatment. The person's not killed, right, the first essential aspect of euthanasia. Neither is the death of the person intended by the withholding of additional treatment. This, therefore, is an unintended death. This is not passive euthanasia. Of course it is. Now what he's doing here is he's arguing against euthanasia, and he doesn't want to, remember when we talked about abortion? The right of a woman to terminate is hers and hers alone and consultate with her physician, but the right is not absolute, and that opened the barn door to every challenge that we're going to have. He's trying to close the door to any challenges to euthanasia. Well, you don't have to, because we make a clear legal distinction. Ethics equals what? Law. The law. We make a clear legal distinction between withholding treatment at patient request and causing the patient to die by administering a drug that we know will cause death. He's going around in a circle because he doesn't want to have to deal with the legality of passive euthanasia. But if we accept passive euthanasia, you may not agree with it, but if we accept it, we still have a reasonable argument against voluntary active euthanasia, which is the rest of his argument, and it makes lots of sense. So the reason I did this is to show you, when you get into these discussions, and this is mostly when you get to the 4-year school and you go on, you're going to have some pretty high heads up there. They're going to be making interesting arguments to you, and you have to sit down and read what they're saying. This guy's going to make an interesting argument from nature, self-interest, and practical effects. He's right on the mark. You don't have to agree with him, but his argument's on the mark. He's making a reasonable argument. And when you get your essays back from me, you'll notice I usually say well-written and well-presented. I want you to sit down and think through your argument. All arguments are worth defending if you're going to present them. They may not be right, but they're worth reasoning through them. And he has an interesting, reasonable argument against voluntary active euthanasia, but he trashes the argument the way he gets into it. And anyone who read it might stop and say, if you got that wrong, how are you going to get anything else right? Well, you owe it to him to read everything. In case he does have something right, it's worth looking at. So, that being said, let's look at his argument. Number one, the argument from nature. Every human being has a natural inclination to keep living. If you haven't figured it out, your body is a hospital. Every time it hurts itself, it tries to heal itself. In fact, it's created to do that, whether it's created biologically or you want to look at it from a religious perspective. Your body's design is to heal itself. You get a cut, hemoglobin rolls in, the little white blood cells get up and running, and they go fight the little disease, and you're okay. You break your leg and you're not near any medical people that can reset it, it'll heal. But it'll heal. It's designed to do that. You may find you have a fetish for grass. Grass has got calcium in it, and you're going to need calcium to make that bone heal. In fact, if you have infants, you'll notice you can take their legs and turn them into pretzels because they haven't solidified yet. And when you have a break, that place of the break when it heals is stronger than a natural bone when it comes out of the womb. It's designed to not let that happen again. And so you will have, women get this when you're pregnant, you have inclinations for certain foods, and everybody jokes about, oh, you want pickles, you want this. No, you have a natural inclination. Your body knows it's on production mode, and you have to be producing certain extra essentials because you're feeding someone else. So your body has a natural inclination to keep living. He's absolutely right. In fact, we struggle when we get to the end of the natural inclination because we're so used to so much time with a natural inclination. And suddenly we realize, okay, so this is, okay, we're coming to an end. The body's losing its capacity. You know what saggy skin is? I had a spinal doctor tell me this one time. He said your body loses the ability, your skin loses the ability to hold water, so it sags. It shows up in various parts of your body I'm not going to identify for you, but you end up having saggy skin. And it's because your body is losing the capacity to hold the water that you're 74% supposed to be made of. How many of you know you're 44% iron? Your blood needs iron in it. It's part of your natural chemistry. You have 27 natural herbs and minerals. Zinc is one of them. You need to have zinc in your body. So your body is this factory, and it produces. Those of you who are athletes, or when you hurt yourself, you ever hurt yourself and not had a lot of your body puts out a natural chemical, a morphine called dopamine. Yeah, when I got ran over by the van, I never felt it. Never felt it. It wasn't until they picked me up and my ankle, well, I snapped it in half. Then I felt the pain. Up until then, my body took care of the pain for me. Didn't heal it, but it took care of the pain for me. So his first argument is the argument from nature. Your body has a natural inclination to keep living. Euthanasia does violence to this natural goal of survival. Of course it does. When you're dead, you're dead. You can't survive anymore.